So how long was the total surgery?
So the total surgery was 21 hours, and how it occurred was in two operating rooms at the same time. In one operating room, the donor was being prepared in terms of taking down the graft, the partial face, and the eyeball, isolating everything that we needed to transplant over. And in the other operating room, our recipient, Aaron, was what his face was being prepared to then receive the graft from the donor. And this is, it's quite meticulous in regards to, well, the blood supply, for example, needs to be connected so that you minimize the amount of time that the eye or that the face has no blood supply. And so this takes time to do. In this situation, one of the things that helped make this successful was that for the eye, the blood supply was actually, there was what we call an anastomosis, or a second connection made before it was removed from the donor, to allow that eyeball to continue to have a good blood supply and to minimize the amount of time that it would not receive blood when we moved it over.
And then when during the surgery was the eye portion of it actually done?
It was actually all transplanted together. So the eye was transplanted with the face, the eyelids. It was all one large graft or transplant. It wasn't separated from the remainder of the face.
So as we know, the optic nerve is one of the most critical nerves for vision. So how was the optic nerve connected from the donor graft to the recipient?
Great question. The optic nerve from the donor was cut at the longest possible point, so that when it was transplanted, we would have there would be some slack in the optic nerve because we expected swelling. In the donor, we were able to find the stump of the previous optic nerve when the eyeball had been removed from the patient after his initial injury. And we reconnected the two by sewing them together with stitches. And within that nerve sheath, specific stem cells were injected. And that was based on some early research that has shown a potential for improved optic nerve regeneration with the stem cells.
That's really fascinating. So there was some hope that maybe some kind of function might be recovered with the stem cells.
To be frank, when we went into this surgery, we went in with the understanding that it would be highly unlikely this patient would ever even see light. But we did include that component, as there is a lot of research being done on optic nerve regeneration. And it was something that we could incorporate into our surgery to potentially provide this patient the best chance of success.
So when we're talking about success, let's talk about the fact that this was, I mean, the first eye transplant done ever on planet Earth, which is totally insane. And I'm so grateful to even know you and be able to talk to you about this. Yeah, talk to me about the success of this surgery and what that means.
So as you touched upon, this is the first successful eye transplant. And what I mean by that is we've never been able to take an entire eyeball out of one patient and transplant it to another human and have seen that eyeball continue to have an excellent blood supply and to stay nice and round. And what I mean by that is when an eye stops functioning well, it actually shrivels up. If you think about a grape left out in the sun too long, it shrivels up into a raisin. So the fact that this eye has not shriveled up yet, the fact that it continues to remain nice and round, tells us that the eye is receiving enough of a blood supply and nutrients to allow itself to make the fluid within the eye to keep it nice and formed. And we liken that to how our body and our bone marrow is able to make blood cells on a continuous basis to allow us to live. And so that's the first step. The next step is we can also see that there's an excellent blood supply to the retina. So when we do that testing I talked about before, the fluorescein angiogram, early on, when there was a lot of swelling in the graft, the time for the blood to go from the arm where we do the injection to the eye was a little bit longer. Within a few weeks, it actually normalized to what we would expect in any of us when we would inject that dye into our arm and see it go to the eye. And we see that the retina really does have a full supply of blood, providing it with nutrients. Now, the other aspect of when we think about success is, can this patient see? And at this point, this patient cannot see. He cannot perceive light. And what I mean by that is if we shine a light into his eye, he cannot tell you that he sees that light. And this is because the optic nerve had to be severed or cut and then transplanted. And we know when the optic nerve is damaged in that form, light cannot be transmitted through the eye.
What are your kind of thoughts on how this can be applied to other patients?
Yeah, so at this point in time, the eye transplant was successful because it was transplanted with the partial face. Because as we put the blood supply together and moved it from one patient to the next, we minimized the amount of time that eye was without a blood supply. And that was only really possible because it was done with a partial face. Over time, we would hope that we can continue to evolve and advance this field so that we can potentially bring sight to patients who have not had sight before. This is just the first step in understanding how that's possible.